Welcome to Mr. Robots channel for daily stories. What is your darkest family secret? A year or two after her adoptive mother died, my mom went looking for information about her birth parents and found that her birth mom and her husband had been gruesomely murdered by a drug cartel. There was an article about their murder in Rolling Stone magazine that had gory pictures of their bodies. Must have been really shocking to her. Hope she's well now. I found out 6 months before my dad died that he was a heroin addict earlier in his life. He was dying of liver disease and tried to overdose one night. I didn't live with him at the time, but knew something was wrong, and that's when my mom and I went and found him on the floor of his bathroom with a needle in his arm. My dad, before he met my mom, was a heroin addict and got clean. Years later he was diagnosed with Hep C, which developed into liver cancer. He commented that if he could he would just so he could just go to sleep and not wake up. I wouldn't take it as a relapse, just a way to end the pain. No one in my family can give me a honest answer on how many siblings I have. Same. My father is 72 and I'm early 20s. He has about 8 kids that I know of. The youngest is 15 and the oldest is 49. My brother from my mother's side recently said he ran into my sister from my father's side. I had no idea who she was. Most of the family members I ask just say they've lost track. Edit. It definitely doesn't seem like a cultural thing, since we live in NSW, Australia. My great-grandfather shot and killed a man in his grocery store back in the 30s over a poker game. He ran a speakeasy out of the back of his store and lost almost $2K, so as the guy was walking out the front after the store closed he shot him and got away with it by telling the police the man robbed him. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed he told my grandfather what had happened. My cousin, once removed, my parents' cousin, was kidnapped, raped, and tortured by a serial killer. She was, after many days, dropped off near a running path with her neck slit. She lived, unlike the other 3, and she could lead the police to his home. He is still in prison. As a child I heard whispering of it and didn't find out the whole truth until I was older. Edit. Not great aunt. Second cousin. Edit 2. My cousin, once removed. One family member killed another by leaving a bag of poisoned donuts on the front steps. We are now hesitant about accepting donuts. Where do you live with such frivolous donut dispersion? That's what I wondered. Me, I rarely get offered donuts. The story of how my dad met my mother is pretty warped, though I've never confirmed it with him. My dad was the youngest in the family and would babysit his niece while his sister worked. From what I'm told, he started sexually abusing her when he was 13 and she was 5. This went on for 5 years. When my aunt found out, she was ready to literally kill my dad. My grandmother gave my dad some money and told him to get out of the state. He did. When he was 18, in his new city, he met my mother at a skating rink. She was 13. They started dating and got married when she was 14. Apparently, they had to go to a different state to make it happen, and my maternal grandparents had to sign off on it. By 15, my mother gave birth to me. We don't talk about it, ever. My dad has never admitted to abusing my cousin. I don't know if he knows I know. I don't know if my mom ever knew. She died several years ago. But I don't hold back my opinion of his marriage to my mom. Whenever he talks about how bad things were with her, I tell him he's the one that raised her, so it's his fault. My dad gave a job to a cousin. I remember as a kid that this cousin I'd never heard of just suddenly popped up out of nowhere without explanation, but I was a kid so didn't really think of it, but everyone made a big deal out of how great it was for my dad to give him a job. I found out 20 years later that he'd been in prison for having a sexual relationship with a student. My dad's cousin killed a dude and his 9-year-old son in a cocaine rage in 1990. He was living in my parents' basement at the time. Investigators first questioned my dad, and then they found my cousin's bloody shoes in the house. The dude used to babysit me and my siblings. I didn't know any of this until I was almost an adult. He used to call me from prison on our shared birthday and it always gave me the creeps. Stopped answering when I discovered the truth. My dad and grandma swear he is innocent, but I read into the case. He's definitely not. Edit. A word. When I was 16, I started driving my granny to church that I wasn't a member of. One day we are sitting on the back pew with all the old ladies, and from the back Sunday school area, this really pretty girl my age walks out. She walks to the back behind our pew and starts talking to the lady next to my granny. They look at me, and then she makes a grossed out face and walks off. The woman then starts talking to my granny, and they start laughing. I asked granny what all of that was about and she said, "That girl thought you were really cute." I got excited until she said, "That's your second cousin." I had a very similar fear, but I was always worried I would accidentally date my half-brother. My mom had given birth at 16, gave him up for adoption, moved, and a few years later had me. I have never met him, and only spoke to him a few times in my childhood, before he cut ties with our family completely. Young me was always worried that any boy I liked could be my brother and I would never know until it was too late. I haven't thought about that in years, but it's funny to me thinking about it now. I expect this is what will happen with my brother. My mom met and fell in love with a guy while attending college when she was in her late 20s, and they moved in together in his hometown on another continent. Eventually I moved in with them. Everything was going well. I was enrolled in a new school, they were both working, etc. She wound up getting pregnant. He was the son of a prominent family, and we lived in an area with a distinct culture from our own. The family didn't want their only son married to my mom, and definitely didn't want him to have a blended family. But he seemed to be fine with it, loved my mom, reassured her. We traveled home for the holidays, and soon thereafter received a ton of packages. My mom realized he had shipped all of our things back to us. She was blindsided. I've heard conflicting stories from my mom, my aunt, etc. but according to my aunt, he said my mom could come back if she had an abortion. My mom said his family offered to take the baby, but she could never have contact with it. She said that he probably would have had a life full of privilege, but she couldn't part with her baby, and she couldn't imagine what people who would put her in that position might do to her baby someday. My mom kept the baby and never saw the man or his family again. My brother has only spoken to him once, and that was because I'm an asshole and tracked the guy down when I was 11, and my brother said all he wanted was to talk to his dad one time. So I facilitated it, not thinking about what it meant. The man is a fucking pussy. Now the dad is a worship leader at a church and works for his family's business, which is pathetically outdated and small compared to my dad's older, bigger business. Sorry, I'm prideful. One of his parents already died, never knowing their amazing grandson. They judge the shit out of my mom, who is beautiful, intelligent, works hard, and has accomplished so much for herself. She's more successful than her ex now, by far, and they are oblivious to the fact that no amount of money can compensate for their behavior, making them nothing better than swine. Their actions completely contradict their reputation and how they present themselves publicly. My dad isn't perfect, by a long shot, but he's shown more of an interest in my brother, more kindness, and spent more time with him than my brother's own dad. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.